Millions of years ago, early human ancestors during the Pliocene and early Pleistocene likely faced threats from large predators. However, direct evidence, like tooth marks or other signs of carnivore attacks on their bones, is uncommon. Some known examples include bite marks on fossils of Australopithecus anamensis, Australopithecus africanus, and Paranthropus robustus, as well as crocodile bite marks on Homo habilis fossils. A 1.45 million-year-old human tibia, or shinbone, from Turkana, Kenya, exhibits signs of having been cut with stone tools. These marks were found on a well-preserved part of the bone and are consistent with butchering, similar to what's seen on animal bones from the same area. The bone's identity is uncertain. It may belong to Homo erectus, Homo habilis, or another early human species, so it's referred to simply as a hominin. The marks suggest the body was processed for meat, either due to starvation or as part of the diet. 2 tooth marks, likely from a large carnivore, were also found. However, it's unclear whether the animal fed on the body before or after the butchering. This is one of the earliest possible signs of human flesh consumption, though such evidence is rare and hard to interpret without more context. Human cannibalism, the act of eating the flesh of another human, has been practiced throughout both prehistoric and historic periods by different human species, including Homo sapiens. This practice is known as anthropophagy when referring specifically to humans. Cannibalism has taken place in many different contexts: social, political, economic, and religious, across various cultures and regions. Archaeological, historical, and ethnographic evidence indicates that cannibalism was a complex behavior with a variety of purposes, including survival, ritual, and nutritional reasons. There are 3 main types of cannibalism. Exocannibalism involves eating individuals from outside one's group, often enemies. Endocannibalism refers to eating members of one's own community, often as part of funerary rituals. Survival cannibalism happens in extreme situations like famine, where eating human flesh is necessary to stay alive. These categories help researchers interpret archaeological findings, although the lines between them can be blurry. In Europe, evidence of prehistoric cannibalism ranges from the early Pleistocene to the Iron Age. Human bones found at archaeological sites often show signs of intense processing, such as cut marks for defleshing, broken bones for marrow extraction, and even tooth marks, strong indicators that the remains were consumed. Despite this, there is debate among researchers about whether these acts were primarily ritualistic or driven by nutritional needs. Controversy over the historical reality of cannibalism remains. In the 20th century, scholars argued that reports of cannibalism were exaggerated or fabricated, often used by European colonizers to justify conquest and slavery. For example, Queen Isabel of Spain once decreed that only Native Americans who were cannibals could be enslaved. Cannibalism might have occurred during times of famine, but questions remain whether it should be called cannibalism at all. Although today cannibalism is considered taboo and often linked to mental illness, traces of it remain in culture and religion. Fairy tales like Hansel and Gretel depict it as a dark myth, and Christian rituals like the Eucharist symbolically represent the consumption of human flesh and blood through bread and wine. This shows that cannibalism, while largely rejected, still holds symbolic meaning in modern society. The oldest known case of cannibalism comes from the TD6 level of the Gran Dolina site in Sierra de Atapuerca, Spain. This site, dating to the end of the early Pleistocene, contains remains of at least 11 individuals from the species Homo antecessor. These remains include mostly children and a few young adults. The bones were scattered throughout the cave and mixed with animal bones and stone tools. About 45% of the human bones showed signs of being cut, broken, and bitten, indicating cannibalistic activity. These modifications suggest that the bodies were skinned, dismembered, defleshed, and even had their skulls broken to extract the brain and bones cracked to get marrow. Researchers debate the reasons behind this cannibalism. Some argue it wasn't due to starvation, but was instead done for food as part of regular behavior, termed gastronomic or cultural cannibalism. Ongoing excavations show that such acts happened repeatedly, likely as part of a tradition among groups living in the cave. The high number of child remains led some scholars to compare this pattern to chimpanzee behavior, where weaker individuals are often targeted in intergroup conflict. This suggests that cannibalism could be related to territorial disputes or resource competition, though it's too early to call it warfare in the modern sense. The TD6 assemblage has been interpreted in various ways: nutritional, cultural, or exocannibalism. However, researchers agree it involved repeated events without symbolic burial, likely tied to conflicts over land and resources. Another early case of cannibalism comes from the Arago cave in Tautavel, France. Here, remains of at least 30 individuals from the Middle Pleistocene have been found. These remains showed signs of systematic bone breakage and cut marks made while butchering. Only specific body parts, like skulls, limbs, and the pelvis, were found, while bones from the torso, hands, and feet were mostly missing. This selective treatment of the bodies led some researchers to suggest that the cannibalism may have had ritualistic elements. From about 130,000 to 40,000 years ago, there is strong evidence that Neanderthals engaged in cannibalism at several sites across Europe. At Moulin-Guercy in France, researchers found remains of 6 individuals with cut marks and broken bones, indicating that their bodies were butchered in the same way as animals. These human bones were mixed with animal remains and tools, suggesting that Neanderthals removed flesh and marrow for consumption. Human and animal bones from Goyet Cave in Belgium offer important insights into Neanderthal behavior. Researchers identified at least 5 individuals, 4 adults or adolescents, and 1 child. Long bones like tibias and femurs were the best preserved. Radiocarbon dating placed these individuals between 44,000 and 45,500 years ago. Many of the bones showed cut marks, marrow extraction damage, and signs of being used as tools, indicating they were processed similarly to animal carcasses. This strongly suggests cannibalism, likely for survival or ritual purposes. Comparable patterns were seen in horse and reindeer bones from the cave, though Neanderthal bones had more percussion marks due to their density. There were no signs of burning, and the preservation of DNA makes extensive cooking unlikely. This is the first confirmed evidence of Neanderthal cannibalism in Northern Europe. As no modern humans were present at the time, other Neanderthals likely carried out the processing. Whether the use of bones as tools had symbolic meaning remains unclear. Although the remains are from the same era as certain stone tools, poor excavation records prevent linking them to a specific culture. Other nearby Neanderthal sites show different treatment of the dead, highlighting the behavioral diversity among late Neanderthal groups, ranging from possible burials to cannibalism, despite their genetic similarities. In Spain, at Cueva del Cidrón, the remains of at least 13 Neanderthals were found with similar signs of human processing: cut marks and smashed bones. Unlike Moulin-Guercy, this site had very few animal bones, making it unusual. The evidence suggests survival cannibalism, likely during a time of food shortage, though detailed studies are still needed to confirm this. Krapina in Croatia presents a more debated case. Over 800 Neanderthal bones were found, and while some researchers believe the bones were cleaned for burial, others argue the cut marks and broken bones show clear evidence of cannibalism. Some even found possible human tooth marks, adding to the idea that the bodies were eaten. Other sites like Prédeles and Boquete de Zaffaraya in France also show signs of cannibalism, cut marks and fractures on bones, but provide little additional context. At Combe Grenal, there's disagreement about whether the cut marks came from funerary practices or cannibalism, though many argue that, due to similarities with animal remains, cannibalism is more likely. Neanderthal cannibalism appears to have been practiced for various reasons, most likely for nutrition, but possibly also for cultural or ritualistic purposes. However, without more evidence, especially symbolic artifacts or burial structures, it is difficult to determine their exact motivations. From the Upper Paleolithic to the Bronze Age, there is evidence that anatomically modern humans in Europe practiced cannibalism, although the reasons and nature of these acts are not always clear. Human remains from this period, especially before the Magdalenian era, are often very fragmented and unusual. In France, it's estimated that 40% of Magdalenian human remains show signs of being cut or butchered, while only 5% were found in formal burials. These signs include slicing and scraping marks that suggest the bodies were defleshed, possibly as part of funeral rituals. At Santa Mara in Spain, human bite marks on ribs suggest that at least some body parts were eaten, though it's not clear if this was done in a ritual or simply for food. Another site, Le Placard Cave in France, has 9 skulls with cut marks and intentional breaks, suggesting they were made into skull cups. This points toward ritual defleshing, though the full meaning is still debated, especially since new animal bones found at the site may change previous interpretations. Gough's Cave in Britain is another key example. Dated to around 14,700 years ago, it contains human remains with clear signs of both eating and ritual treatment. Skulls were carefully shaped into cups, and tooth marks were found on bones, showing they were chewed. Researchers believe this is a strong case of ritual cannibalism, meaning the bodies were both eaten and treated in a meaningful or symbolic way. The Mesolithic site of Grotte Perrats in France also shows clear evidence of cannibalism. The bones of at least 8 people were found, with many cut marks and broken bones, similar to how animal bones were processed for food. Over 40% of the human bones showed signs of cutting, breaking, and even scalping. The research suggests this was cannibalism, but does not commit to whether it was for survival, ritual, or possibly to harm outsiders. The Brillenhöhle site in Germany includes human bones with a high number of cut marks, particularly on the foot bones. Although one interpretation proposed these were from secondary burials, later studies found human bite marks and signs of marrow extraction. These findings support the idea that the individuals were consumed, likely through cannibalistic practices. In the Neolithic period, the Fontbrégoua site in France revealed remains from 13 people processed like animals. Notably, skulls, hands, and feet were missing from some bone piles, possibly indicating war trophies or ritual use. Similarly, at Herxheim in Germany, the remains of over 1,000 people showed signs of cutting, bone breaking, cooking, and even human tooth marks. Some skulls were made into cups. While some scholars suggested complex funeral rituals, others concluded it was exocannibalism during wartime, supported by evidence like strontium isotopes showing distant origins of some individuals. Additional Neolithic examples from Spain, such as the Cueva de Malalmuerzo and Cueva de Cariguela, show clear parallels with earlier sites. human remains were found mixed with animals, bearing cut marks and deliberate bone breakage, again pointing to cannibalism. Skull cups further support this interpretation. During the Bronze Age, Cueva del Mirador in Spain provides evidence of what was originally interpreted as brain extraction for food, but this may have also had a ritual aspect. Many bones show signs of boiling, cut marks, and human bites, strongly suggesting that cannibalism occurred. Other proposed Bronze Age cases from Central Europe lack detailed analysis, making firm conclusions difficult. By the Iron Age, cannibalism appears much less common. A few UK sites show human bones with cut marks and green bone breakage, but no thorough studies have been done. In later history, cannibalism became a social taboo associated with barbarism. Most modern European cases of cannibalism relate to extreme necessity or mental illness rather than cultural practice. Defining cannibalism in prehistoric Europe is complex, especially when trying to identify it in archaeological contexts or understand its causes. Some scholars attempt to distinguish between anthropophagy and cannibalism. Anthropophagy refers to occasional acts of eating human flesh, possibly by individuals, while cannibalism is seen as a cultural or social practice that may involve group participation. However, many researchers argue that these terms are essentially synonymous in archaeology and should be treated as such. The simplest definition, which most agree on, is the consumption of human tissues, like flesh, marrow, blood, etc., by other humans, though pinpointing the motivations behind this behavior is far more difficult. Historically, scholars have categorized cannibalism into several types: gastronomic cannibalism, for food value; ritual cannibalism, for spiritual purposes; and medicinal cannibalism, using human tissue to treat illness. Survival cannibalism involves eating humans in extreme hunger, and aggressive cannibalism is revenge-driven or antisocial acts. Dietary cannibalism, which she considered the easiest to identify archaeologically, as it's focused purely on nutrition. Cannibalism is not a single, uniform practice, but a complex behavior influenced by social, religious, political, and economic factors. It can be grouped into two main types: exceptional cannibalism, driven by immediate needs like survival, and socially instituted cannibalism, which is embedded in cultural practices such as rituals, warfare, or beliefs about death. There are many subtypes of cannibalism, including ritual, medicinal, self-cannibalism, legal, symbolic, and even gourmet cannibalism. These categories, often based on ethnographic or historical data, reflect a wide range of motivations, from honoring the dead to humiliating enemies. However, such classifications are difficult to apply to prehistoric cases where motives can't be directly observed. Ethnographic studies show that cannibalism often relates to a group's worldview, spirituality, and social customs. For example, in some societies, eating human flesh may have been part of managing life and death or expressing dominance over enemies. These acts weren't always considered barbaric, but were integrated into social and religious life. In archaeology, it's challenging to determine why cannibalism occurred because many of these complex cultural meanings leave no physical trace. Analogies from ethnographic studies can help, but they must be used carefully, as prehistoric societies might not have had the same symbolic systems. Terms like nutritional or gastronomic cannibalism are often used to describe cases where the primary goal seems to be food. However, these labels can be misleading. Eating human flesh always involves some nutritional value, but that doesn't rule out symbolic or ritual aspects. Even so-called nutritional cannibalism might follow social rules or customs, blurring the line between practical and ritual behavior. Examples from prehistoric Europe, such as the Gran Dolina site and Herxheim, suggest cannibalism linked to intergroup violence. While Gran Dolina might show survival-based or violent cannibalism, Herxheim displays signs of more structured, possibly ritualized practices that reflect cultural and symbolic meanings. The identification of cannibalism in prehistoric European contexts relies heavily on taphonomic analysis, the study of processes affecting organisms after death, particularly bone modifications. Archaeologists distinguish cannibalism from other cultural practices, like funerary rituals or mutilation, by identifying specific anthropogenic changes such as cut marks, bone breakage for marrow extraction, human tooth impressions, cooking evidence, and spatial associations with animal remains processed in similar ways. While these signs can sometimes overlap with those resulting from ritualistic or mortuary practices, the consistency and pattern of modifications provide strong indicators of cannibalistic behavior. There has been considerable debate within the academic community about interpreting such evidence. Some argue that mortuary practices can leave similar marks to those attributed to cannibalism, citing ethnographic parallels like defleshing rituals. Others counter that these claims ignore critical contextual distinctions and fail to account for parallels in the treatment of human and animal remains. When human bones are processed identically to food animals, defleshed, broken for marrow extraction, and even cooked, the evidence points more convincingly to nutritional cannibalism. Still, the interpretation remains complex. Sites like Brillenhöhle and Fontbregua illustrate this tension. Some scholars have dismissed cannibalism at Brillenhöhle based on the presence of cut marks, while others argue that the intensity and nature of the modifications indicate consumption. Fontbregua is frequently cited as a robust case for prehistoric cannibalism due to its extensive evidence of butchering. However, even this interpretation has been questioned, highlighting the subjectivity and evolving nature of taphonomic interpretations. To refine identification, researchers have developed methodological frameworks focusing on the type, frequency, and anatomical location of bone modifications. Studies compare human remains to those of animals processed at the same site. Human tooth marks, although shallow and sometimes hard to differentiate from those of other carnivores, are considered strong evidence when found alongside cut marks and perimortem bone fractures. Their presence in sites such as Gough's Cave and El Mirador strengthens arguments for cannibalism. Ultimately, a holistic approach is necessary, one that examines the entire archaeological context, compares human and faunal assemblages, and carefully considers the spatial and taphonomic evidence. While some assemblages still yield ambiguous interpretations due to small sample sizes or poor preservation, many European sites, spanning from the Lower Paleolithic to the Bronze Age, share enough taphonomic characteristics to support the occurrence of cannibalism. These include systematic butchering, evidence of marrow extraction, burning, and sometimes human tooth impressions, all of which collectively differentiate cannibalism from other cultural treatments of the dead. Evidence for prehistoric cannibalism in Europe has grown, yet it remains relatively scarce, limiting broad generalizations. Across 18 archaeological assemblages ranging from the early Pleistocene to the Bronze Age, signs of human cannibalism have been documented. The increasing number of such findings suggests cannibalism was practiced intermittently over long periods, especially intensifying after the Upper Paleolithic. Most cannibalized assemblages share distinctive taphonomic features, such as a high frequency of anthropogenic marks, often over 20%, which is higher than those found in North American contexts. Contrary to the view that such cut marks indicate mortuary practices rather than cannibalism, these marks more accurately reflect full butchering sequences not typically seen in funerary contexts. The processing includes defleshing, dismemberment, evisceration, bone breakage, burning or boiling, and, in many cases, the presence of human tooth marks. These practices go beyond what is seen in ritual or secondary burial and point to actual consumption. The pattern of butchering, breaking, and thermal processing mirrors sequences recorded in other global contexts like the American Southwest. Common features include long bone and skull breakage for marrow and brain extraction, disarticulated skeletons, and the occasional anatomical association of segments like hands or feet. Human tooth marks, bone crushing, and percussion marks are widely observed, although these require more experimental validation. Tool use from human bones, though rare, has been documented in specific periods such as the Magdalenian. For the more debated assemblages, the presence of human tooth marks and consistent processing methods strengthens the argument for cannibalism. These assemblages should be revisited with modern techniques, including DNA, isotopic, and chronological analyses, to develop new interpretations and insights. A holistic analytical framework, including demographic data, tool associations, and stratigraphy, can help clarify whether cannibalism was a rare event or a routine, institutionalized behavior. Finally, the motivation behind cannibalism remains elusive. Traditional labels like nutritional or ritual may oversimplify a complex behavior that could have occurred in contexts of violence, survival, or even affection. Ethnographic parallels help interpret these findings but must be applied with caution. Ultimately, only through integrated, multidisciplinary approaches can we hope to understand the frequency, causes, and cultural meanings of cannibalism in prehistoric Europe.